Yeah, so welcome everyone to the School Safety Subcommittee. We have a few new faces this week and names, so we're going to do a round of introductions here in a minute. And then when Cindy's able to get our agenda up, we'll review that. So my name is Siobhan. I'm the facilitator for this subcommittee, and I'm also helping with the full commission. And so thanks for your interest in being here. And we'll run through last week when I think the only people we have that are crossover from last week are Nicole and Moises. So we went through and identified some goals and some topics that we need to unpack a little in the subcommittee to work towards what we want to accomplish. And so first we'll do some agenda review, and then we'll review for the benefit of those who weren't on the call last week. We will go through and look at what we developed and feel free to add in your ideas. We left it intentionally as a draft because we knew there were going to be other people joining us this week that would likely have ideas and want to weigh in. So we put together a draft and we can review that. It was in the meeting minutes if you were able to look at that. Otherwise, we'll just look at it together, which is fine. And then we want to develop a plan of attack on how we want to go through and talk about each of those items. And then we have some public listening sessions planned as part of this process, where the public will be invited in to share with us their stories and share with us their experiences with the police. And so there's a couple things we want to learn from this subcommittee about what do we want to learn from those public listening sessions? What kind of questions do we want to ask of the public? And then how we think that that can feed our work here in the subcommittee. So we have that to talk about. And then we also deferred a conversation. With this current meeting schedule, we run into a couple of holidays. And so we need to talk about shifting those. Our work to make sure that we still have the same, my desire anyway is to make sure we still have the same amount of weeks and still have the same amount of time to do the work, because there is so much we need to cover. So that's our agenda. And again, we'll do a quick round of introductions because we have different faces this week. Again, my name is Siobhan. I'm a facilitator with the Langdon Group. I'm originally from New York, and I have lived here and been doing this type of work for the last 15 years here in Salt Lake. So I'm very familiar with the area and some of the issues. I'm just gonna go down my little list here of windows and ask people to introduce themselves and sort of what your background is when it comes to this subcommittee and its work. So Nicole, you are first on my little box.
Hi. There's an echo. Sorry. Hi, I'm Nicole Salazar. I'm an attorney in Salt Lake. I practice primarily in the area of family law, but I am very active in all sorts of other community activities, a lot of boards and lawyer-related functions. But school safety and SROs are something that have been on my mind for quite some time, ever since I was a DCFS caseworker in my former life. And I'm very excited to work with everyone on this. Looks like you're on mute, Siobhan.
Thank you. So anyway, Cindy Liu is our staff member from Salt Lake City who's helping us out and making sure to take great notes and make sure we get all of our business together. Cindy, do you want to add anything to your introduction, or are you good?
You covered it. Thank you.
Okay. And then I'm because I have not said any of your names out loud to date, I'm going to ask for your forgiveness. Dahati, is that correct?
You can just call me. I think. Yeah. You can just call me Dati. I'm a junior at West High, and I also serve as the student board member for the Salt Lake City School District. I think SROs are something that West High especially has had a really deep involvement with, especially with our principal and that kind of relationship. And I've also worked with the mayor's office before, and we're working on bringing a new youth program to the city. So I'm pretty excited about that, and I'm really glad to be here. So thank you.
Thanks for being here and thanks for your interest. Rogelio, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, it's Rogelio Romero. I volunteer at Salt Lake City Peer Corps. I went to West High School and I'm studying to be a secondary education math major.
Sorry, I missed. Where are you studying?
UVU.
Excellent. Okay. Aaron.
I'm Aaron Afalava. I have lived here in Salt Lake City for about 5 years now. I am an advocate, community advocate, specifically for the Pacific Islander community. And yeah, that's me. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. Thanks, Aaron. And then let me see if we got everybody. My window reduced here. Okay. Moises, you're next in my list here.
Hello, everybody. My name is Moises Prospero. Basically been working close to 30 years in the criminal juvenile justice system as a practitioner, researcher, professor, trainer, administrator, blah, 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 blah. I'm one of the core members here. Dati is one of our guests that I invited today because Mater informed me of her. So thank you, Mater. Thank you, Dati, for being here. And Steven Juern said he's just running late as he usually is. So there you go.
Thank you, Moises. Kamal, you're next on my list.
Hello, Kamal Ahmed. I am a school administrator at Granite Park Junior High School. Most of my experience up until this year has been working with SROs with students who have disabilities. I was a self-contained special education teacher for the past 8 years and just moved into administration. So it's something I'm passionate about and have some background knowledge in as well.
Excellent. Mater, you're next.
Sorry, I'm having problems with my camera, so can't turn it on for now. But my name is Mater, and I'm a senior at East High. And a lot of my community involvement, like in the past year, has been mostly like in the environmental field, but I've started crossing it over into like racial equity, which fit in nicely with this committee. And I think like SRO work is relevant to me given that I'm a high school student, and I know it's something that a lot of the high schools in the Valley are having some issues with. So I'm just interested to see how that goes.
Wonderful, thank you. And then Sadie.
So I'm just an intern with the Disability Law Center, so I'm just listening in on this session.
Well, thanks for being here and thanks for listening in. We appreciate your group and their interest, and we've seen you pop up in a few meetings, and I think that's great.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and letting me listen.
Of course. So before we jump into reviewing all the work we did last week, there is one quick item that came up on youth subcommittee membership and attendance at subcommittee is that I want to bring to everyone's attention for your, we want as much involvement as possible from everyone. The one area we run into with just Open Meetings Act is that we have to be careful not to have a quorum, or then we pop up into a whole nother list of regulations that we have to abide by. And certainly we can do that if it's the will of the group, but it does reduce our ability to have more discussion-based meetings. They get a tiny bit more formal if we end up with a quorum. So I would just say for youth subcommittee attendance, as long as we don't get so many folks that we go over that, and I believe our quorum number is 11. So as long as we don't pop up over that 11 barrier without discussion, at least, that we don't do that without discussion, then I think that making sure that we have attendance from that group is excellent. I would just ask that you guys maybe self-monitor attendance as a group and make sure that we don't have an abundance at meetings that kick us into that. Is that fair, Moises, as your sort of lead of that group?
Yes, Siobhan, just so you know that not all youth subcommittee members are voting members or part of the commission. So it used to be 2, now we only have 3. So like say if Dati were eventually to join the youth subcommittee, she's not a voting member, so she wouldn't be counted, I'm assuming, and therefore not included as part of a quorum.
Maybe you can clarify for me then, just for my understanding. We have 3 voting members, and do those voting members rotate though?
Yes.
That's the one part
Yes.
that makes it a little bit confusing for me on like what counts towards a quorum and what doesn't.
Exactly.
So we'll have to look into that a little more, but just something to keep an eye on and make sure that we're not.
I'll make sure that I'll keep you abreast of that if we're getting too close or something like that. As they rotate, I'll like, oh, all 3 of them are on there. Let's decide.
And I want to be very clear. We want your involvement. We want your ideas and interests. We just have to be cognizant of all those rules that govern this process. So excellent. So thank you for that. Cindy, would you mind popping up those notes if you have them so we can look at the items that we discussed last week? If you have it handy in the Teams file where I dropped it. If not, I can, if you make me a co-host, I can do it too. It's either way, whatever works for you. I can run through that.
I'm just grabbing them now.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Are you able to see those now?
Nope, I still see the agenda.
Me too. Thank you.
There we go. So we can pop down to right about there. Yep, that's wonderful. So these were the items, and the folks that were in attendance last week were a little bit different. So please let's add to this if needed. So first we talked about just what does this group need to accomplish? And actually, can you scooch down just a little bit to show me the goal that we came up with, which is a teeny bit further down right here in bold. So we tried to keep our overarching goal of this committee pretty simple, which was to examine the efficacy of the SRO program. If it's not effective, we can recommend changes in policy or process, or look at replacing or ending the program. So that was what we came up with. Again, this is all draft. So if we see that we need to adjust that, but we felt like that sort of got at the end goal of this is to just make sure that that program is effective. And if it's not, if it's ending up being detrimental for those it's meant to protect, then we can recommend change or replacement or different solutions. So now we can go back up to those items above. Okay. So first thing we talked about was the school to prison pipeline, linking how the SROs and other school programs might be contributing to this. So making sure we spend some time unpacking that question, making sure we really understand that connection, and if there's things that need to be addressed there. Looking at once the cases actually go to the criminal justice system, Nicole was mentioning that the schools no longer have any say in what happens and how it's prosecuted, and that can it's probably meant better as a sub to that one above, that may be one of those contributing items. We wanted to look at how children of color are interacting with the SROs, and including that disproportionate representation of children of color who end up in front of the juvenile court system as a result of that program. That's our understanding, is that it's a disproportionate number. Also, students with disabilities, and we made sure to explicitly say that students with disabilities should include mental health and substance abuse issues in our definition of students with disabilities. we're just saying, is this the best system, the SRO system? Are there systems being followed, or is each school doing their own thing? Meaning, is there a protocol when there's misconduct? Are they all following kind of that a same system, or is it really individual to each school and its needs? And we were saying, rather than letting their biases and experience guide the process. How are the systems being evaluated? What is their measure of success? What are they trying to accomplish? We also talked about, who is that safety for? Who are we trying to keep safe? Are we trying to keep the students safe? Are we trying to keep the staff safe? What are the stated goals of that program? So those are the things that we came up with last week. I want to ask those, especially those who are new to the group this week, are there things that are on your mind that you don't feel like we have covered there, or don't feel like fall underneath one of those?
Yeah, so I have something to add with that. So it's like exactly, so the process of how an SRO gets involved with the student might change per district. I work in Granite School District, but live in Salt Lake School District, where my younger son goes. So usually the admin SRO cannot get involved without admin permission unless it's a safety issue within that school. So if it's students of color being singled out, especially students of color being singled out to the, or referred to the SROs, why? So I feel like there's a deeper problem with that issue than the SROs that we definitely need to look into in order to really get to the bottom of that issue.
Okay. Tell me,
If that makes sense.
can you say it a different way? I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah,
not sure that I was
so
following
for a
you
student,
entirely.
so for a student to be referred to an SRO officer, I mean, they can only intervene for the most part with admin permission unless it's a safety issue. So if they're having multiple interactions with students of color, why? Is it referred to from the staff, teachers, admin? Are they referring these students to the SRO? Is there a pattern in how they're doing it? Some
Okay.
schools that's the case. And if not, if that's not the case, what are the safety issues that are happening for the SROs to get involved without the admin's permission? Like for them, like what's happening within that school?
Okay, so that there, if I'm going to state that back to you a different way to make sure I understand it, that it's not just the officers who are deciding to have interactions with students. A lot of it is coming referrals from different places within the school, including administration. So that
Absolutely.
These could be feeding into the SRO system in ways where we might see patterns and be able to unpack it that way. Is that
absolutely? Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of decisions made, unless it's issue where the law is broken, admin is usually the one making those decisions of telling the SRO what to do. I was in that situation yesterday. So so I think that's something we really need to dive into with school safety.
Other items that we don't see included here that are of interest or have come up for any of you?
Yeah, I was just going to agree with what Mr. Ahmad said. I think administration, they write up like a citation on like a little sheet, and that then goes to the SROs. Most of what I've seen, the school board actually had a presentation a couple of weeks ago from the head of the SRO department, and they told us mostly by word of mouth. There's no actual contract or a specific clause that says this, but they would like to give admin more leeway, like school officials more leeway and more control over students than they execute. But then again, that's not iterated anywhere in policy that they've said literally. Also, one thing that was brought up at the board meeting was that the SRO system doesn't really have a complaint system either for students or their families to directly complain about a situation or an instance that they felt, was wrongly or unjustified. And I talked to them about that, but that seemed to be brushed over a little bit more than I had hoped. And so I think that's really important to help hold that system accountable. I don't know if you have access to the data, but they have a lot of data specifically from, the number of complaints or the number of citations they've issued to students and interactions, right? And they've shown, oh yeah, go ahead. Were you going to say
No,
something?
finish your thought, and then I have
Okay.
something.
And I think they've said that, the numbers are going down, the number of students that they're interacting with is going down. But even within the data, you can see it disproportionately affects students of color. So I think that's a really important point to make. And so that's all I got.
So we did talk a little bit, if you, did you, Dati, did you get the notes from last week? I know you were, okay, we'll make sure that those get forwarded to you, because we were also, we spent some time looking at what data we have available to us that might help address some of these things. And we do have some data. I would be curious from you, Dati, if it's the same data that you had seen, or if there's another source of data that we need to grab and pull into the system. So when you do have a chance to go through and kind of review the stuff that we did last week and what we'll send out this week, I'd be curious to hear from you if that's the same or different, because if we need to dig up some other stuff, we were pleased to note that a lot of the data we were hoping to have already exists. So we were able to pull some of that, and I have that to send out to this group. One of the other things I will note that we talked about last week is holding, because there is a meeting that happens after this meeting at 5 o'clock. That's the policy subcommittee. There were, no, not policy, training. That's right. Okay, training, and there that people wanted to participate in both. So we did decide to hold this meeting to 1 hour rather than expanding that time frame. So with that, the folks that participated last week agreed to homework. I said, if we're going to stick to an hour, that might mean that we have to divide and conquer a little bit, reading some of these, doing some analysis of the data we have available to us to try and see how they relate to these issues. So just so you all know, your last week participants have signed you up for for a little bit more work outside of these meetings where we can. Of course, we're not going to make everyone do a ton of homework, but if there are things we really want to dig into, we may have to spend some time outside of these meetings doing that work. So other thoughts that we need to add on to those, I really appreciate the two that were added, as they do feel very distinct from the others that we talked about last week. Are there others that, from your experience with the SRO program or your knowledge or your various networks, that we should be talking about here that we haven't?
How do we choose the SROs, who's hiring them, and how they are chosen to go to specific schools?
That should be in the MOU. I believe that details it pretty clearly how the SROs are kind of chosen. And it's been a minute since I've read the MOU, but I believe it said something to the effect of the administration and SLCPD would decide how that happens and who's picked for each school. I think that's what it says. Don't quote me directly on that, but it is in the MOU.
Okay, and we talked last week about the memorandum of understanding, that's MOU, for those who aren't familiar with that acronym. The memorandum of understanding that created the SRO program between the school district and the police department. I haven't read it yet, so if I'm mischaracterizing that, let me know, but that was the MOU that brought that program to be. And so we do have that. We do have the Voices of Utah Children. Is that right? There was some studies on that, the school to prison pipeline that we have available to us there, and also the data from the Salt Lake City PD on the SRO program that they provided to us. So those were the three main points of data that we talked about last time that we felt like would address, hopefully, a lot of the things that we're talking about here. And then perhaps we can look at the gaps in that data, and if there's data that we want to collect as a subcommittee, or if there's things we want to do to supplement what we have, if it doesn't answer all the questions. So we do have some of that, and I dug it up, and I'll make sure that it all gets sent out to all of you.
Siobhan?
Yes. Hi.
Just to clarify, the SRO program has been around a lot longer than that MOU.
Mhm.
And so that MOU was developed way after the program was put together. And it was to address some of the issues and describe roles for each for administrators and SROs.
It was
I
to
don't-
further define things that needed defining, or was it in response to a
Yes,
specific?
It was to define specific, I think it's only a year old. I want to say that MOU is only like a year or two old. It's really new.
Okay.
the first iteration was done because of a lawsuit at West High. And that was because through the ACLU. And so we worked on that. And then this last one was the newest iteration, was just like a year ago or so.
Yeah,
I don't
think it's
know
only-
if it says specifically exactly how do you select an SRO, but it does give an overview of having school participation in that.
Mhm.
But yeah, so there's still details that can be brought up, Rogelio, so you can know. So we could discuss that, like within the police department, how does somebody even become an applicant, right? So, and I know that won't be in the MOU, but once those application pieces go, then the rest will follow through.
Right. No, that's a good point. How does the police department pick which ones are going to even be put into the pool of prospective applicants for the SROs for each school? No, that's a good point. But I know the MOU is worded as detailed as it can be, because you can't get super detailed in a document like that. Otherwise, it will constrain both sides. I've learned in my years of drafting MOUs that you've got to be a little bit broad in how you draft them, because you need to make sure that it covers every possible thing that could ever happen. And if you get too detailed, it can make it an unusable document.
Makes sense. So that's why I added, because we had a conversation about this last week and it did not get recorded, that we talked about the genesis of the SRO program and its stated goals, which I think relates back to who is being kept safe by that program. What's the intent? Was it meant to protect the students? Was it, and so I assume there has to be a document that has that information in it from maybe further back than the MOU when the program was created. Don't laugh, Moises. I assume it.
Sure.
And if it doesn't, then that's research that we can look at doing to talk to the people who are kind of involved in that beginning of the program to try and understand, because that was something we talked about also last week, that in order to address the issues with it, it would be good to understand what the purpose, what the stated purpose was, what the original goal of that program was, and what, how our recommendations might play into that. Aaron, you raised your hand. Go for it.
Yeah, I just kind of had a question if anyone knew also if SLCPD also has an existing database of the officers, I guess, history as far as like them using unreasonable force or things like that. And if that also translates into the SRO system.
So how, I mean, Moises, I'm sure you can speak to this, but my understanding, which is not detailed, is that they do have, a file that follows each officer, correct, in their history? Or is
Hey, Steve, can you answer that?
Hey, is Steve on? I didn't see him join.
And I'm sorry that I'm late, but I am here, Siobhan. Hello, everyone.
Again.
Wow.
We'll allow it. Go for it, Steve.
Short answer is I don't know, but I'll make a few comments anyway. For sure, it will be documented in the internal affairs system, and whether or not, so that would be allegations and findings of the investigation. I don't know for this particular department if it also follows in your personnel file. They're often kept separate. But yeah, I think that it's a reasonable idea that if someone's going into the school, that the people that have the need and right to know that information can review that, and that can be part of the selection process. But I don't know for sure how they document it.
Okay, so and please correct me if I write any of this down differently than you intended me to. So I'm just writing it down as I'm hearing it. So if you see
It's
it,
perfect.
okay, great.
Thank you.
And I think that's another great point that we can look at. So with
Good question, Aaron.
Good question.
It
Thank
was
you.
a good question. Hey, on the data piece, I jumped in late and now I'm going to interrupt because we talked a little bit about documents that can and should be there. And if it's been addressed, I apologize. I was thinking one thing that would be really helpful for this group is good understanding of the legal modifications in the juvenile justice reform. So HB 239, because there are a number of lower level offenses that are no longer under the jurisdiction of the juvenile court if they occur in school. So within the last couple of years, the role of the SRO will have changed because of the change in state law. And I think it would be good for everyone on this committee to know what some of those are and aren't that cannot be sent. There's exceptions, but that in general cannot be sent to the juvenile court.
Okay. Did I get that the number of the bill correct? 139?
I think it's 239 and it's what would that be 2017 session 2017 39 and it's yeah, I think that's going to be an important piece of information for all of us as schools reassess how they address these behavioral issues that have often in the past been over-criminalized. So there's a lot fewer of those cases going to the courts from the schools, which by extension would impact the SRO.
I can imagine that'll be important for us to understand as we look at this other data that might span further back than 2017 that might affect how we look at that. Go ahead, Nicole.
So the Voices for Utah Children report was drafted looking at data before and after that legislative session when that statute took effect. And it did show that there was a decrease in the number of kids being referred in general, but the end result was that there's still actually the overrepresentation of students of color in the juvenile court system increased by a lot. So the statute worked for white kids, but got worse for brown kids. So that was the kind of larger takeaway from that study was that SB 239 did work for white kids, but not so much for children of color.
So the Voices for Utah Children report unpacks that bill and its effect a little bit. So that work has maybe been done for us a little bit. I like that.
Yeah, it shows the before and after. They have a ton of amazing graphs and it's I read all that during the blackout because I had no internet access. So yeah, I was able to actually read through that. It's a really good report and it unpacks a bunch of that data. Highly recommend everybody read it because it's really well done.
Okay, so with that and looking at the time, I want to make sure we get to all of our agenda items. So our next agenda item is to really look at how we want to tackle this work. How do we think the best way to dig into these issues, knowing that we have an hour together each week that we have a subcommittee, not a full committee meeting. So with that, does anyone have thoughts? And certainly I can offer some, but does anybody have thoughts on how, or if there's a logical progression, if some of these questions might feed into others, if especially maybe Nicole, I'm looking at you who's read some of this data and maybe that will tell us maybe there's a logical place to start here. As I look at it, I think questions like this with the what was the genesis of the program, I feel like they're an important starting place. Say, well, what was it meant to be? And then we can look at the data to talk about, well, what has it become? What were the results of that? Was it successful? Was it not successful based on its stated goals? But does anyone have thoughts on how we can tackle this as a group before I impose my own thoughts?
I think my first thought is read the MOU because that's specifically between Salt Lake City and the Salt Lake City PD and the Salt Lake City School District. So that's the one, it's the only school district we can really work within because of our jurisdictional restrictions. So I'd say that is a really good place to start, is look at that MOU. And I found some issues with the MOU, and I don't know how, I know it was a negotiated document between the city and between the police department and the school district. So I could tell where there is some give and take on both sides. But I did see some problems, and I'm not sure if it's because of liability reasons or because of employment reasons with the Salt Lake Police Department. But there are issues that I noticed, and that might be a really good place to start, is just by looking at that MOU and seeing what we have to work with. And I think just looking at the data of how many kids are being referred and receiving citations. So that citations report also from the police
From the
department.
PD. Okay. Any other thoughts on the subject? Moises, it looked like you had a thought, or maybe, and Nicole, just so you know, I was shaking my head no. That was for my children who were behind the camera. It was not at you. They were requesting more snacks, and I was no. So lest you think I was shaking my head at you. Okay, so Moises, did you have a thought?
I do like what you talked about how this program originated from, because I would have no idea where that would be. But also a reminder, and it's kind of based on what Steve was saying, that was the goals back then. Have those goals changed? And even asking them now, what are your goals? Because I don't see a program, especially if they're 2 decades long or whatever, staying with the same goals, especially if there's huge reform that's forcing them to change their practices. So I think we need to make sure that we follow that goalpost as it's moved, because to say, oh, this was your goal back then, well, look what's happening now. I don't think that's right.
Okay, so I agree that
So that with the MOU and the SLPD data, I think those would be 3 good things to look at.
Yeah, those seem to be continually coming up as sort of foundational documents on this SRO bit. So I have a thought that I'm going to just throw out there for consideration. I wonder if we can break up these questions, and sort of those 3 reports feel like they're going to be required reading at some point. And so I wonder if we can break up these questions and have folks go through them and read them with these questions in mind. So you're not just reading a dry, I assume all of this is dry document. Maybe it's not. Maybe whoever wrote the MOU was super eloquent and wonderful. But so that we can go through them with answering some of these questions in mind. So if we gave each one of us, 3 or 4 of these data points to say, well, go through the Voices of Children report and see what you can dig up on these 3 or 4 thoughts. Because we're probably going to need to read sections, if not the entire bits of those at some point. Perhaps this is the best way to do it, is sort of assign homework that way, to say, well, Aaron, you went through and read X report. What did you learn about how the officers are being evaluated, et cetera? So I can work with staff and see if we can't just sort of assign it out a bit that way. And there may be some overlap, because I think one person sees something one way, and it's worth having a couple sets of eyes on these things. So but I would also say, if you absolutely, there are members of this group who I know have many, many, many obligations outside of this group. So I also don't want to overtax people. But I do think we should all be working from the same sheet of music, and those 3 documents. Outside of those 3, we can look at having someone else do analysis for us, etc. But I think those 3 would be, including myself, I think I'd like to spend some time reading those so that we can all be talking out of the same set of data. On top of that, I'm wondering, when we're talking about the genesis of the program and the changes since, I can ask city staff if there's a member of the PD or somebody who's sort of the point person for that program, who could come to speak to us. And I don't know if that's something that the group would be interested in, but certainly the chief has said, if there's things you need, we're happy to assign people to help. So is that something that's of interest to have, or do you think that's maybe after? Do you think that's maybe down the road a meeting.
I think that would be down the road. I think we need to kind of go through the data, see what we're thinking, and then go in and ask and kind of have our conversations.
Okay, so maybe I'll just ask and see if there is that person, if that person exists, and identify them. I'll do that work to make sure that we know and know who maybe our resources are, and we can talk about tapping into those resources when we have better questions for them. We're developing.
Siobhan, there is a sergeant that's in charge of that has actually already presented to us. So I could send you that information, but yeah,
okay.
just so you know that there is.
Thank you.
But
Sorry,
as to the history of the SRO program, I wonder if Sandra Hollins would know, because she was kind of the architect of this juvenile justice reform bill, or she helped, and she's been really involved with the SRO program. I wonder if she would know how that started.
We can look into her and our.
Did you have her cell phone, Moises? You could just text her and be like, hey, do you know how this all started?
I don't think she's gonna know, but that's my thought.
And in Salt Lake City, SROs have been in the schools since the early 80s at least.
Yeah, I have.
It's a long-standing program. I'd be curious. We could probably get some historical information across the country. I don't want to say it doesn't exist, but I would be pleasantly surprised if we found it.
I would be too.
We're
the Debbie Downers.
Our mayor's staff member is telling me that she found an agreement back from 1977. It wasn't called SRO, but it was officers being assigned to schools. So we may have some history to reconstruct. Also, our staff member from last week. Now, Cindy's going to be our staff member week to week, but we had a person from the mayor's office who joined us last week. And when he in follow up, he sent me an email and said, there's a woman named Angie Doan who used to work for the mayor's office, who was involved in the development of that MOU, who might be a resource as well.
I know how to reach her. She's no longer with the city. She's now an assistant AG in the Child Protection Division, but I do know how to get a hold of her.
So that she might be a good person to help us kind of reconstruct that history and understand it better. So yeah. I think we have good resources, and we'll kind of create, to your point, Rogelio, we'll make a list of those and sort of tap them when we're ready to tap them. But while we're talking about resources, one of them is this public listening sessions that we're putting together. So I want to ask this group while we're here, what do you feel like our subcommittee can learn from the public at large, people who self-select to participate in these listening sessions, to tell us, hey, here was my experience, etc. And as we're designing those, as the facilitators are designing those, we can certainly look at, hey, here's some categories of people we want to engage with. Perhaps there is a youth category, or a people who have interacted with issues of school safety, even if they're not all young people. Maybe they were back in 77 or whatever it was, but people who have, we could organize it that way so that we have kind of that school safety listening session that's dedicated to that. We could also just make sure that we have outlined some questions that give us information that's beyond the experience of this group, right? That's just, hey, how have other people experienced this program or the school to prison pipeline, etc. So I put that to the group to see if you have thoughts on things we can ask of the public, and I'll track these. Anybody?
I would say specifically for West High, we had our principal, Ford White. He was suspended and then terminated from his contract. But I don't know if all of you are familiar, but I'm certain a couple of you are. We had, 3 students who were found intoxicated on campus around 11, and our principal drove them back home because he didn't want them to get caught up in what was then the justice system. And so I think that brings up a lot of questions, which is, one, where is the misconception, or what are the holes that are in the law that are not fulfilling this, right? Because being intoxicated underage is against the law. And where does restorative justice come into play here? And how do we address all of those things? So I don't want to put the students who are involved in that situation on the spot, but I like to give them the opportunity if they feel like, this is something that they want to be heard about. I know they've all moved on, but I'm certain that if they'd like to, they should have a space where they can advocate for other students. And also maybe we could hear from Principal Ford White. He had his, I think he had his hearing, I think this past Friday. So it's still pretty fresh right now. So those are just a couple of people I could think about off the top of my head.
Okay.
I would like to hear from parents. Because I have heard from parents and their experiences from their children and how they were treated. And it's not, and I want to make sure that it's not just negative experiences, but positive as well. To have it open. So if there's a lot of negative, then there's a lot of negative, but there's a lot of positive, there's a lot of positive, but just to have both sides open. But parents for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Moises. And just from my brain as I'm listening to this, I think it would be good to hear positive stories so that we also know what to preserve of that, so that we're not unintentionally dismantling something that's of use to a lot of people and we're perceiving that maybe it's not what some element of this program perhaps. So I think hearing both sides and inviting positive stories as well will give us a little balance and give us some perspective on what's useful and what's not. Other thoughts on things that we can learn from the general public or how we might want to structure these so that the information we get is most useful to because people will come and they will, I do public engagement for a living on a numerous number of topics, and you will always get people who will come and tell their stories, and we want that. But I also think that we want to structure it in a way so that that feedback is something that we can take in and use and turn into something productive. So helping people to channel that and saying, here's, we'd like to hear specifically stories you have to share with us on X topic or things like that.
Identify something that seems to be a little off. I'm just going to go ahead and jump in here. I would like to hear from our administrators and schools on, once students interact with SROs, or if they are disciplined, what support services are available or resources to help students get back on track, or just those strategies for student success.
I like that. I think that's an element we didn't touch on last time, and I really like understanding what surrounds the program. How do they get in, and then how do they get back out the other side? And knowing some of that data, I think is great. Other things, Nicole?
We should probably hear from some SROs themselves. We'd probably want to make that not a public listening session, though, just because we'd want them to be
as candid as they can be,
as candid as possible without fearing either public repercussion or repercussion within their department. To know what's working, what's not working, what they like about the program, if they see any improvements that could be made, or if they see something that could be done better. If they even feel like their program is needed, if it can be done a different way, more effectively.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else? Okay. I am looking at the clock and we have 8 minutes remaining. So if I'm just going to check my agenda really quickly and make sure that I have us on track here.
What was the third document you wanted to look at? The MOU?
The PD data and the Voices of Utah Children was the other report that we had talked about. Okay, so, our last one is Veterans Day. Veterans Day, and I want to say, Cindy, you don't by any chance have our meeting schedule handy, do you? Our list of dates?
Josh shared it just a little bit ago in a different meeting, so I should be able to pull that up. Yes.
Wonderful. That would be excellent for us to look at calendars. Most of the other subcommittees addressed this in their meetings last week and elected to just go one day on either side. there is a city council meeting on that Tuesday. So it's, I mean, if any of you are planning on being civically engaged that day with your city council, it does conflict with that if we go to the Tuesday. So, but Cindy Lou, do you ever roll at council?
The Office of the Recorder does, yes. I came from city council, so I'm familiar with all of that. But
Okay.
you're just asking about the meeting on the 10th, right?
Yeah, I'm just saying if we
Yeah,
move
I
it
could
to
certainly
Tuesday,
cover.
you could
Mhm.
cover. Okay.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to stop sharing so that you can share when you. Yeah. So while we wait for Cindy to grab that, are you okay if I take a stab at assigning out these questions with the documents and sending those out post meeting? And we'll have some overlap. What, bud? Yeah, go ahead. No. Yes, you may. They're in the car. Yeah, see, I say no once and then I give up. So, okay, here we go. So we have our school safety meetings going November.
Does anyone on the training committee remember what we ended up doing? Did we go on Tuesday?
On the 10th. On the 10th.
I prefer to.
Yeah, we did on the Marine Corps birthday. I know that was important to you.
So
I will celebrate with you, but it'll be after the meeting. I would prefer, if it's amenable to the group, I want to throw out, it would be nice to have those meetings on the same day. So it's just one evening. But
so the 10th. Okay. Steve has opened it up with a, so we're not going to call it a motion because we're not doing it formally like that, but I thought that maybe the 10th would be a good place to move it. We can keep it the same time. If that works. And then does anybody have real problem with moving it to the 10th, or are we going to just do that without discussion?
I couldn't make it. I think that might just be my issue.
Okay. Anybody else? I mean, what will that do to anybody else's attendance? Well, Rogelio won't be able to make it. I think that we'll never find a date that works for every single human, but if I want to make sure it's not going to tank our numbers that week. So Nicole,
Would it still be at 4 o'clock?
that's the current thought on the table. You can introduce a different one, but only because Steve wants to make it to the training one. So then it would be one after the other because the training has gone to that same day at 5.
I'll make it sound like it's all about Steve. It was just a suggestion that if we could keep it on the same day, that would be.
That's the current idea on the table. It can be adjusted.
The 10th works fine for me. I just have the Rules of Evidence Committee at 5:30. So I wouldn't be able to do it if it's at 5 o'clock, but I can do 4 o'clock.
Okay. Any other thoughts from the group? Okay.
4 o'clock on the 10th work for me.
4 o'clock on the 10th, then we will shift. I mean, all the other weeks, I believe, we have the Wednesday, the 23rd. That is the day before Thanksgiving. I myself am not traveling for Thanksgiving. It will be at my house with just
I think it's 25th.
Yeah. Sorry, what?
25th?
You want to move it to the 25th?
No, it's
Wednesday,
on
November the 25th.
Oh, we have the date wrong. I see. That's my son's birthday, by the way. I should definitely know that. I should definitely have been more on top of that.
That's my sister's birthday.
Oh, same. That was that cute little blonde one that just showed up. It's his birthday. Are we okay with kind of hanging at that date? Cindy Lou, is city, they're working that day, I assume. It's usually day after that.
Right. City staff will be working on the 25th.
Okay, just want to make sure we're not kicking it into a holiday. Okay, so if we're okay with hanging onto that date, then we are all up to date. And oh my gosh, we're gonna land on like almost exactly on time ending. So what I will commit to is we've dug up that research. We have it. I knew it was in the Google Drive. We just were pulling it out. And so I will send out a document. I'll take our take our questions and sort of divvy them out to and maybe assign a couple people to each category so that we and include the people who had joined us last week who are unable to join us this week, so that we can spread that around and do our homework before next week. And I'll try and get it out as soon as I can, so that if your opportunity to do that is sooner rather than later, that you have it in hand. All right.
And Siobhan, real
Yeah.
quick, if can people just come to the subcommittee if one of us invite them, or how is that? Do you know how we're doing this?
So the subcommittee, I think we have on the agenda, I have kind of a list of our members, the people who signed up from the commission to be on the subcommittee. I think there is benefit in having some consistency week to week. However, I am not here to limit, simply to make sure that we have at least a core group of people who are trying to be here every week, so that we're having a continuous conversation and that we're not having too many people jump off and back on. So that's what my interest is.
I did not state my question correctly. How about community people that are not part of the commission? Have we talked about that at all?
Yeah, that my understanding is this link is made public with the agenda that Cindy Lou will tell me if I'm wrong or not, but she posted on the website. It's a public facing link. People like Sadie, who's joined us today on this call from the Disability Law Center, can come on, listen in. I believe we're also posting the recordings after the fact. So if somebody's not able to join, or like, I know we have a couple of the youth subcommittee members who weren't able to be here, we're posting those recordings too. So if you do miss a meeting or you have to join later, whatever, those are all there. So
Thank you.
that's people are welcome to join. We just, they're not gonna like vote, or I doubt we're gonna do a whole lot of voting, but they're to observe. Okay. Unless we've invited them to be like a speaker or something like that, and then they'll have a role. All right. Well, it's exactly 5 o'clock. So we have really done a great job and gotten a lot done this week. It's wonderful to see all your faces and talk with you. I think this is going to be, I think we're going to get some great work done. So I will send out our homework, and I will see all of you on the 10th. Right? Right. Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Yeah, nice seeing all those new faces. Awesome.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks
Bye.
for participation.
Thank you.